Good evening, everyone. So yesterday we have actually seen how the SCD Type1 will be tested and how the data will be stored in the SCD Type1. So let me just recall what we have discussed yesterday. Like SCD Type1 is something that which will maintain the most recent data, and it will not maintain the historical data. When you say historical data, it's like for one supplier you'll have only one record, and if at all, if any changes in the attributes like supplier name and supplier state, only the latest values will be available in the warehouse as well as the OLTP system, and it will not maintain the previous values or the historical values of the data, right? So when you look at this, a supplier code, supplier name and supplier state, so if you recall what we have discussed yesterday, first supplier was in the state of NY, and then they moved to the another state, Texas. So the latest location is this, and even in your data warehouse also you'll have the latest location. So you can understand that saying that like SCD Type1 will not store the historical data. So what we have done, so in case of SCD Type1 as discussed, like we can match the data unless you are filtering any data, unless you are restricting any data when you're loading it. So the first one is about the count validation. What I have done is like the number of records present in the source should be matching with the target unless you are restricting the data or something. So in this mapping example, so we are not eliminating or we are not restricting any data. So the count is matching between the source and target. And all the time, and also like source minus target, it's always holds good. When you say a source minus target, like the data what is present in the source should always be the same in the warehouse as well. So when you see the minus query, even when you run a minus query, there were no changes between this. And the null validation is as usual, you have to do it. And the next one is about the insert logic. So how are you going to verify the inserting of the data, or how do you verify the insert logic? See, the first one, since we'll not have access to the source system to modify the data and all those things, so what we have done is we have deleted a record which is present in the source table. So I have queried it and I have deleted a record called as a SPA and verified it. So when I reran the workflow, so after deleting it, rerun the workflow or wait for the next day, rerun the workflow or wait for next day, then verify whether that record is being added or not. So after running the workflow, if you verify that record should have been added, SPA, which means the records which are not present in the target is being added, and the created date and the last updated date should be same when you are populating the new record. And in order to test the update logic as well, so if you see, we have updated in a record in the target table to some dummy values, and we have updated to some dummy value, and then we have rerun the workflow, and verify that whether that data is properly updated with the actual attributes what is present in the source. So that way you verified the source, that way you verified the insert and the update logic. And at the same time, primary key column supplier code should not have duplicate values. So I just try to check whether we have a duplicate value there or not. And then if you look at the supplier code, supplier name and supplier state, so this also we have verified it. So across all the columns, at the row level, we don't have any duplicate with respect to supplier code, supplier name and this. So this is how we verified the slowly changing dimension type 1 and how to test it. See, once you understand the slowly changing dimension type 1 testing, and type 2 and 3 are pretty simple. It's the same logic that we follow. So once you understand how the data is stored, you can easily understand how to verify the duplicate records and all those things, right? So that's it more on the SCD type 1. So if you have any questions, probably you can go ahead now. We'll discuss about it and move on with the next example. Right. So if next thing is that we're going to discuss about the slowly changing dimension type 2, how a type 2 will be implemented. So we'll take the same example, like same supplier example, and then try to test it. So let's first understand how the data will be stored in the slowly changing dimension type 2. So the first one is your input. So what does it says? SCD type 2. So let me just let's first understand how the data is stored and what it says. So SCD type 2 says whenever a record is existing or not existing. So first, whenever a record is new to the OLAP system, so just like type 1, we have to insert the data. And the second one is, let's say whenever a record is existing and there are some changes in attributes, So even this time you need to insert a record with a new attributes and update the old attribute. So that's what happens in case of SCD type 2. Now let's try to understand how the data will be stored. So let's take the same example. So what we have discussed yesterday to understand this. So if you go here, supplier code, supplier name, supplier state. So assume that supplier is actually in the New York first, and then it's moved to Texas. So suppose, let's say most of the time the SCD type 2 will be implemented in 3 ways. One is in order to identify the latest record, it will be implemented in 3 ways. One is a flag, another is a version, another is a dates. So if somebody asks you what type of SCD type 2 dimension is implemented in your project, then you will just say that we are having a date version of slowly changing dimension, and dates, we are using a effective start date and end date to identify the latest record. So this flag, version and dates are an additional columns which are added to the SCD type 2 to determine the latest record. So, and also there is another key called as a supplier, surrogate primary key. I think we have discussed this during the so supplier PK, and you have a supplier code, supplier name, and you have a supplier state. So along with this, to determine this, you'll have a start date and end date. So you need to have a start date and the end date of it in using it. So now we have this thing, supplier PK, supplier code, supplier name, and supplier state, start date and the end date. Now this is like a surrogate primary key. Whenever we generate a sequence values to this. So if you have a supplier code, so what you do is you go and verify whether the record is existing. If the record is new to the OLAP, we insert that record. So let's say now first time the ABC is not existing, so the record will be inserted something like this. Supplier PK is 1, and you'll have a supplier code is ABC, and the supplier name is Acme Corp. So supplier state is NY, and start date would be let's say the day when you are inserting record. Suppose let's say you are inserting a record on 2nd Feb 2010, so you'll insert it, and the effective end date will be always 31st December 2099. I mean, like, it's basically will actually give the very maximum date, something like 31st December 999 or 2990. So anything something like that, so which we give. And the second one is your supplier PK. Let's say there will be an additional record which will be there, and the supplier code is Wal, and let's say Walmart, and supplier state is NJ, and let's say this is added on some 10th October 2010, so we'll actually mention it as 10th October 2010, and the future maximum date we are going to stamp, because you don't know like how long this record is going to be valid with these attributes. So whenever a record is new to the OLAP, so that's what we are inserting that data, and that is what is happening. So suppose, let's say over a time period of time, the supplier is relocated from New York to Texas, and this data is updated in the OLAP. So whenever a record is updated in the OLAP, so what you do, you have to insert that record. Assume that this supplier is relocated maybe based on some, let's say some 12 October and 2013 or something. This supplier is relocated from the New York to Texas. So you'll insert another record, so third, and let's say your supplier code is going to be the again ABC. For the same supplier, you're going to insert one more record. So there is a change in there is no change in the supplier name, so it's going to be the same thing, and supplier state is modified, so you'll have it as Texas, and here the start date will be 12th October 2013, and this is going to be the 31st December 999. And how long this record was valid? See, the supplier was in New York till 11th October 2013. That's it. Thereafter, they've started working. They're relocated to this one. So you can mention it as something like this. So what is happening for a same supplier, you'll have a multiple records in case of SCD type 2. That is called as a historical data. It maintains a historical data. So complete history will be maintained. If the supplier is changing for 10 times, you'll have 10 records, past 10 records. So when I say complete history, it says that old and the previous values, all the previous values. Again, do not get confused here. So old and all the previous values will be available. So suppose, let's say Acme Corp is being modified maybe after some time, let's say in 10th October 2014, again they changed this to Acme Inc. or something. So let's say this time they have modified the name, not the state. So they're in the same state, but they've changed the company name. So whenever there is a change in any attribute, it's not necessarily to be the supplier state or something. So if this is changed, again you're going to add one more record in case of this one. So let's say Acme Corp is being modified to Acme Inc. and this one same state is same. So when it is being modified, let's say 10th October 2014, so or some 10th November 2014 or 14, and when this is going to be the future maximum date, and this one, whatever the date that is there, it is actually valid from 9th November 2014. So likewise, whenever there is a change in attribute, you're going to have a multiple records. That means here the supplier code can have a duplicate values with respect to the column level, but at the row wise, it should be unique. It should be unique. So how do you determine the latest record in this? Based on the effective end date. Whichever is having the effective end date as 31st December 999, or sometimes we'll also maintain the null values in the end date. So whichever is having a effective end date or a end date as 31st December 99, so that will be your latest record, and that way we determine. See, SCD type 2 is like it maintains a complete historical data. So that's why if you see, you have all the previous values of ABC supplier. What was the supplier name before and what was the supplier state before. Everything is being tracked. So most of the time when you go to the real time, basically, you'll have, customer table, product table, and these are the most sensitive data for a business. So they maintain a historical data. So you should be able to understand how the data will be stored in the SCD type 1. So supplier PK should be always unique, and at the row level it should also be unique. So this is how SCD type 2. So this is like a date-wise implementation, and otherwise you'll have only one flag which indicates whether the current record is the latest record or not. Just a flag column will be there to determine. So this is how SCD type 2 data will be stored. Now, based on this example, we'll try to test our example. So that is your source is going to be the same thing again. So SCD input, and this is going to be the source for our testing, and the target is going to be the dim supplier 2. Dim supplier 2, and this we're going to test now. So let's observe the structure of the tables, and the mapping which we are going to use is m underscore dim supplier 2, m underscore dim supplier 2, and you have a workflow, that is your workflow underscore dim supplier 2 or something. So this is your um, these are all the details that which you have to test. So let's take a look at the first target table structure. So if you look at it, so describe dim supplier 2. So when you try to check this, so supplier PK, supplier code, supplier name, state, and all those things, you have an effective start date and effective end date, and created date, last updated date, or like an audit columns. So to track when the record is created and when the record is updated, basically that will track it. And SCD input, it's the same thing again. So same source, we have this one, and then try to see. So what I'll do is, in order to test this from the scratch, I don't think we have a data in the dim supplier 2. So what we'll do is, we will actually load the data into this table and then verify whether our insert update logic is working fine or not. All those things. We don't have a data now. So the mapping which is loading the data into this table is m underscore dim supplier 2, right? So this is thing, and we are going to load the data into this one by executing this workflow. This is our, so now if I run this, let me just check whether we have everything is correct or not before we running it to avoid the failures. And looks good, and this one is fine. Okay, let me just run the workflow. So now the data will be populated, so you can verify how many records are added, how many are rejected, and everything is successful or not. So these are all the same things, I mean, which you. So let me just get the previous runs. So it would have been loaded, I mean, like it should have loaded the data. No, it's not loaded. Something is wrong with this. Okay, looks like there is something wrong with this. Okay, let me just. Just give me a moment, like you don't need to modify all this at the real time. So there is something wrong in loading the data because of the table structure. Either we can add this active flag, or what I can do, I'll just recreate the table. creating a table because the structure of the table is having a mismatch between the Informatica definition as well as your OLAP database. That's why it is like that. Okay, I think now this is good with this effective start date and effective end date. Now, if you look at this one, so let's try to refresh the changes and run it again. So if you check it, obviously like 15 out of 15 records should have been inserted. For the first time, there are no records, so all the 15 records would have been inserted. So try to verify this. So now your supplier PK has populated the numbers from 501 to the is whatever the values that it has. And if you see, the effective start date is today's date and effective end date is a future maximum date. And we have an additional column to determine whether the supplier is active or inactive. So that is being, everything is being populated as a Y, and created date, last updated date is this one. See, in case of SCD type 1, first thing is validation of a count. See, validation of count between the source and target is not possible. It's basically same supplier data will be stored multiple times in your same supplier data will be stored multiple times in the SCD type 2. So suppose, let's say in your source, now assume this, let's go back to the same example what we have discussed. See here, ABC supplier here in the OLTP level, you'll have only one record. For the same ABC supplier, you have multiple records in the OLAP level. So basically you cannot validate the count of data between the source and target. Definitely it is not possible because same historical data is being maintained, but in case of OLTP, it is not maintained. So count validation, you cannot do it, and I can say this is not applicable. So you cannot make count, you cannot match the count between that, but you can just find out the data on whatever it is. And the second one is running a minus query, column level data validation. See, when you look at the column level data validation, so you can always write source minus target. The records which are present in the source must be present in the target. So if you write the source query, so it's basically you'll write all, let's say you have a supplier code and you have a supplier name. So only these attributes, whatever the attributes that are there, and effective start date, end date, created date, these are all populated from Informatica. So you'll not be having them in the source. So supplier name, and you have it as a supplier state from, let's say you have it as SCD input, so sdbu dot scd underscore input minus. So what are the columns that you have it in the target, which you have to match? So supplier code. So you can match this. So you can match this after a multiple runs or a single run. Always this should match source minus target. We have only 3 attributes here. That's why I'm just validating 3 attributes. In case of a real time, I mean, when you go to the real time for a dimension tables, you'll have close to 20 to 25 attributes, something like that. So you need to take care of that by mentioning all the attributes. Now, when I run this column level data validation, so this should also match. So we should not have any kind of a data discrepancy when you run from source minus target. Whatever the data is present in the source, either it has a historical data or a latest record, it should be present in the target table. So minus query, you can do that. And the third one is about the duplicate validation, right? See, when you look at the dim supplier 2 data, so always row level you should not have a duplicate. So when you look at this one, so at any point of time, the data which is a combination of supplier code, supplier name and supplier state should not have a duplicate. The duplicate data should not be there and it should not be present with respect to this. Do not include this start date and end date and everything. So if you have to validate at the row level, first of all, so you should not have a duplicate. So if I write a query, so supplier query, so supplier code and supplier name and supplier state, and I'm identifying the group of this count of star from what is the target table name. This is your target table name, dim supplier 2. Group the data by all the columns, supplier code, supplier name and supplier state, and having count of star greater than 1. So try to execute this. So you should not have a duplicates at any point of time using this. And at the same time, even your surrogate primary key, whatever we are talking about, that should not have a duplicate records. So surrogate primary key should be unique. Sometimes if your developers do not enable the constraint as part of data model, so there may be a possibility that same record might be inserted. I mean, same surrogate primary key might have been generated because of some mistake. So you can also validate that surrogate primary key is not having any duplicate records. So this duplicate values group by supplier PK, group by supplier PK, and having of count of star greater than 1. So try to execute this and see there are no duplicate records which are existing. So we have seen the minus query validation as well as a duplicate query validation using this. Now, what should happen with the insert update logic? Basically, you have to wait for you need to also validate how the insert is taking place and how the update is taking place and all those things. So if you look at the first one, maybe the how to validate the insert logic operation. So basically the insert logic is what we have validated already, but anyway, if you have to check it. So the first step is that delete a record from the target which is present in the source. So how to do that? Now we are deleting in the target. So let me just first query like what record can be deleted from this. So we have different things, different records here. So try to query. Maybe I'll just delete this one, like Walmart one. So where supplier code or supplier PK, so you can just give it as supplier PK is equal to some 504. So this I'm going to delete it. So delete from dim supplier to where supplier PK is equal to 504. So that means I'm deleting a record. I'm deleting a record for a Walmart. So now once you delete it, so just commit the data, cross check once whether the record is deleted or not, and check that once again to cross verify the record is deleted. Yes. Now the second step is that wait for the next day run or wait for the next workflow run and observe whether this record whether the deleted record is added in the target table. So here we cannot wait for the next day run, so I'm just rerunning it. So when I rerun, there is only one record should get inserted in this. So let's see how it works. So now one record is added. Verify that, verify the record which is deleted is being added. Verify the record. So this is the third step. So try to execute. I mean, same supplier key is not possible. I mean, basically we have deleted the supplier code, which is Walmart. I mean, wall or something. So that should have been added. Now this is a supplier code. So I've just deleted based on the supplier PK, but same supplier key may not be populated. It will be all the time. It will be keep on getting incremented. So it's better that you know the unique column name so that we can determine. So if you see, this is just now added, like 31st December, and if you go and see the normal, the created date and last updated date, you'll easily identify that when the record is actually added. So in order to observe that, I'm changing it. I'm changing the session start time. Alter session NLS date format is equal to, so dd-mon-YYY HH24 MISS. So I'm just showing you, I'm changing the date format is because just to understand whether the record is added now or previously. Set. Now try to query this. You'll be easily able to understand like when the record is being added. So the rest of all the other records have been added on 652 and this record is being added at 7.1. That means this has added when we have rerun that for a next time. So the insert logic is working fine. So if the record is not existing, the record is getting updated in the target table. So the next one is to test the update logic. So update logic, how this works. So it's basically same approach. So instead of deleting a record, so what we do is we'll update the record in the target table, target table to some dummy value, target table attributes. So any attribute you can check, you can update any attribute. So it's basically to update. See, let's try to update this Costco wholesale. So this one I'll just change it to some other thing. So when you say update, let's say dim supplier 2, set. I'm changing the supplier name. For this. So instead of that, CST wholesale, I'm changing it to CST wholesale. For a supplier CD, where supplier code is equal to CDE. So when you try to execute this, row is updated and commit the data. So it's basically you have updated the value to some other value. So since the record is existing and there is a change in supplier name, so you should have another record which should get added with a normal name. So for a CDE now, if you check it, you have only one record, right? So if you verify for CDE, how many records are there in your target table, you'll have only one record. That is with the attributes what we have updated. So when we rerun the workflow, what happens? There will be another record which gets inserted with a new supplier name what is present in the source. So it's basically this is created at 652. There will be another record which will be created and then populated. Now, second step is that rerun the workflow or wait for a next day, rerun the workflow and observe whether the new record is being added or not. Observe that new record, observe the new record is added in your target table. So you're going to verify that. So now I'm rerunning the workflow. Now only one record should get inserted and one record should get updated. Basically the effective end date of the old record should get updated. So now if you go and verify this for a CD supplier, you should have another record which would have been added. So verify that and see for a same CD now you have two things. See, this record is actually valid till 7648 and this record is valid from this. This is your latest record. And if you see the active flag also for an old record is updated to N. So this is how you can maintain the historical data for a same supplier. So as the data grows, you'll have a multiple values for a same supplier in the SCD type 2. So this is more of a slowly changing dimension type 2 testing. So now if you go and verify the count validation, right? So count validation is not applicable because for a same supplier, you have a multiple values here. So why I said count validation is not applicable. So try to get the count of source records. So SCD input. So I think we need to suffix it with or prefix it. So prefix it with a SCD input. So try to execute and SCD input. And the next one is your count of star from dim supplier 2. So try to execute this. So you have 16 records here and you have 15 records here. So count you cannot match it. So basically this will not work. So that's why count validation is not applicable here in case of a SCD type 2 because for the same supplier you'll have a multiple values which will be available, right? So that's more about your slowly changing dimension type 2, how to test the SCD type 2. See, most of the time when you go to the real time, you'll have only the type 1 and type 2, not type 3. But anyway, we'll also see how the type 3 example works here in using it, right? So if you have any question, probably quickly you can go ahead, like with respect to SCD type 2. Dimension testing.
Karthik, actually in real time, most of the table is like this, correct? So type 2 what we discussed right now. So we can't able to test that count value then?
Yeah, because logically speaking, the records what you have in the source will not match with the target because in your warehouse you are maintaining the historical data, but at the same time the same historical data is not maintained in the OLTP system. This is the same example, right? So if you go and see for a supplier code CDE, you have two records here in the target. Go and check. In case of source, you'll have only one record. So if you have such kind of inequality, in terms of historical data, so definitely you cannot match it, and that is not possible as the data grows.
But in real time, it will be keep on changing like this, what we discussed right now, right?
Yeah, it will be like the same thing. Even in the real time example also, the data will be getting accumulated on the target in terms of a historical data. So you'll not be able to match it.
Okay.
Hey Karthik, I have a couple of doubts. I just wanted to know, like in real time when we are deleting a record in the target table, we'll have actually a lot of records, right? Like 10,000, huge in number. So if we test for one thing, would it be sufficient to say that the entire data is perfect after the insert and update logic?
Yeah, this is like a initial set of setting. Initial set of data testing that you do. What happens is that sometimes the ETL testing will be divided into two cycles. First, they refresh once in the source data. In the second cycle, again, they'll bring the new data from production and then they refresh as the source system. So that time what happens, there will be a changes which happens for a lot of suppliers, maybe the data will be changed. So when you rerun the data loads, since because there is a huge change in the data at the source system level, most of the records will get updated and the new records will get added. So when you do the second round of testing is basically you'll execute the same queries in the cycle 2. That time you'll be coming to know maybe the most of the records might have been modified, but this is just that we are doing it for one record. And as a bulk, if you have to do that, then as the changes happens on the source system level and when your data loads are run, then you can validate for a bulk of records or a more number of records. So that's how the general process, because it is not possible for a tester to update 10 or 15 records every day and then do that, right? So they refreshes the source system so that these things are working fine or not. That's how it works.
Okay, so each time when we run, we don't have to actually test 2 or 3 suppliers. Even one supplier should be good for the rest of the records.
Yeah, rest of the records it's fine, but sometimes there may be issues with data truncation or duplicates and everything. So if you are able to match the minus query as well as a duplicate query, yeah, that should take care of it. Yes.
Okay. And just one more thing, like about the SCD input, is it also necessarily, I mean, should it necessarily be a dimension table like the source?
No, at the source level, we don't have a classification of tables in terms of dimension and fact. It's basically, we define as a dimension and fact only in the warehouse. So if you're working with a non-warehouse systems, you'll not have this terminology at all. So you'll observe only the dimension and facts in the warehouse and the data marts, not in other things.
Okay, so it should only have the current updates, not the history. Only the end product, I mean the target should have all the details.
Yes, that's what we learned even in the data warehousing concepts. When you say that data warehouse is historical, but your source system is not historical. If your source system is historical in nature, then there is no point of building that warehouse, right? So will not have historical data in the source system.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Pat.
All right. Then we have 15 minutes of time, so probably we'll also discuss this the another one that is about your SCD Type 3. So how SCD Type 3 works, but we'll come across very rarely about slowly changing dimension Type 3. But nonetheless, let's understand like how the data is stored in the SCD Type 3. So if you look at the SCD Type 3, it says that it maintains the partial historical data. Partial historical data means it just maintains what is the previous value and the current value. When I say previous value and the current value, what is the previous record and what is the current record? So let's try to understand how the SCD Type 3 works. See, whenever a record is new to the OLAP system, that means it is not present in the OLAP, then we are going to insert a record, and if the record is existing and there is a change in the previous value to the current attribute, record is existing and there is a change in current value to the OLTP system attributes, OLTP, or you can call it as a source system attributes, then you'll update the record. So this is how it works. So it's basically the design of a SCD Type 3 will be a little different compared to Type 1 and Type 2. So if you look at let's take the same example again. I think I closed it. Let me just get that. Take the same example, that is your supplier code and everything. So assume this is your testing data, whatever you have, and you call it as a dim supplier 3. So when you are designing it, it's basically will make use of the surrogate primary key or not. Sometimes we'll use it or sometimes we don't use. But if you look at the supplier code is unique because you're going to have only one record for one supplier. And here you'll have a previous supplier name and current supplier name. So you'll have a two attributes. I mean two columns for each attribute. And here also you'll have something called as a previous supplier state and current supplier state. Previous supplier state and the current supplier state, which will be there. So when you insert for a first time, let's say ABC is a supplier which you have for a first time, the previous supplier name will be null because this is the first time you are inserting it. You will not have a historical data. So the current supplier name is going to be Acme Car, and a previous supplier state will be null, and the current supplier state is going to be NY. Similarly for a Walmart, so you'll have this one. Previous supplier name will be null, and the current supplier name will be this, and current supplier state is going to be NJ. So you have a supplier code, previous supplier name, current supplier name, previous supplier state, and current supplier state in this. Now, let's say over a time period of time, this guy is actually relocated from New York to Texas. So what is going to happen? You're going to compare the source attribute with the current system. So there is a change. So your current supplier system will go to the previous supplier system. So you're updating the same record. See, not the new record you're inserting, you're updating the same record. And the current supplier state will become Texas. And similarly, over a time period of time, if the name is changed from Acme Corp to Acme Inc., so your previous supplier name will be this, and you'll have so this one also this way. So always you'll have only the partial history, that means previous history. So in case if record is being updated more than once, again let's say if it is again they relocated from Texas this time to IL, so what happens? Your Texas will become previous supplier state and current supplier state will become IL. So if you have to understand what is a previous to previous supplier, previous to this one, you'll not be able to get it. It just tracks only the partial historical data. It will not have this one. So most of the time, that's why your dimension will be of your SCD type 1 or a type 2 dimension, which will be there. So in case of SCD type 3, so basically looking at the, now I hope you can easily understand what type of dimension it is, whether it is a type 1 or a type 2, just looking at the structure of the table. So in case of this, when you're validating, you can validate the count, because for one supplier you'll have only one record. So always the current supplier name and the current supplier state should match with the source, and count validation will also work between the source and target. You can write it, because for one record you'll have only one custom. So the second record is minus query validation. So this also will work, because you need to validate the source attributes with the current. So when you say that minus query, it's just the same thing. All you need to do is you need to use them as a current supplier and the previous supplier. So let's say if you call this as current supplier name, and this should be current supplier state, and this is going to be the dim supplier 3. So in order to test this, you have a mapping called as a m underscore dim supplier 3, m underscore dim supplier 3, and you have a workflow underscore dim supplier 3, workflow underscore dim supplier 3, which it is there. So this is how we verify the, this is how you have to run a minus query, and it's the same approach again for validating the duplicates. Always at the row level you should not have a duplicates, so include all the columns here, and then the insert update logic is also the same way. Just update one record, add one, delete one record in the source, and update one record in the target and all. So that you can validate as usual. So this is more on the SCD type 3. I'm not going in much details about it. So it's the same logic that what you have to apply. So if you understand how the data is being stored, then you can easily apply the your query logic to test it. So this is how SCD Type 3 testing will be done. I mean, SCD Type 3 testing will be done, and you can perform that, right? So that's it I have for today. I mean, in case if you have any questions with respect to anything or from the previous examples or anything that you can go ahead, we'll discuss on that. And if you do not have any questions, probably you can drop off. And yeah, Malar, can you share your screen now? Probably I'll